Hey guys, tonight we drift back to the sprawling city of Istanbul, though in the Ottoman days people still called much of it by its older name, Constantinople. You're walking in the soft gray of dawn, when the air is cool and your steps echo lightly in the garden paths of Topkapi Palace. The mist curls low over the ground like steam rising off a kettle, and you can hear the faint splash of fountains hidden behind cypress hedges. You smell earth, rich, loamy, damp with night's condensation, and faint sweetness from jasmine clinging to the walls. You probably won't survive this if you actually try to live only on dew and garden fragrances, but it makes a good start for a sleepy story. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is, because I love picturing you all scattered across the world, drifting to sleep at once. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You keep moving forward along the gravel path, and the crunch under your sandals is muffled, almost respectful of the hour. The Sultan is still asleep in his chambers, but gardeners have been awake since before the call to prayer, tugging weeds, trimming herbs, and whispering to each other in Turkish that you only half understand. You see low raised beds brimming with vegetables. Not the flashy fruits you'd expect from a court known for its success, but humble greens and roots. They sit in neat rows, dew clinging to them like glass beads. This is your first glimpse of the forgotten vegetables of the Ottoman kitchen. You crouch beside a bed of herbs, brushing your fingers across mint leaves that release their perfume instantly. Next to them are strange, pale green stalks, celery, though not quite the kind you find shrink-wrapped in supermarkets. These are older, knobbier, grown more for their roots than their crisp stalks. Gardeners speak of how they'll be simmered into stews, their earthy taste deepening the broth for the palace kitchens. Historians still argue whether celery entered the Ottoman gardens through Byzantine traditions or later Arab influences, but either way, it took root and stayed. A gardener, bent nearly double with age, pauses to nod at you. He gestures to a row of carrots, long and dark, nearly black. You blink, because you thought carrots were supposed to be orange. That's a modern twist, bred in the Netherlands centuries later. Here, the carrots are deep purple, staining fingers as you pull one out of the soil. The old man chuckles at your surprise, explaining that these roots were once sweeter, stronger, and made perfect dyes for food and cloth alike. The fringe tidbit he adds, some folks believe purple carrots could ward off melancholy if eaten regularly. Does it work? You're not sure, but you can almost picture an Ottoman scribe chewing one while trying to finish copying a manuscript at midnight. You wander further, past the symmetry of the garden beds, and a soft cooing overhead draws your gaze upward. Pigeons nest in the tiled eaves, their feathers puffed against the morning chill. Gardeners leave bowls of seed for them, because even palace birds are pampered. And in a moment that feels almost like a joke nature set up just for you, one pigeon waddles directly into a row of onions, pecking curiously before deciding onions aren't worth the effort. You laugh softly, because who among us hasn't been disappointed by a vegetable at some point? The sun edges higher, faint rays spilling across the Bosporus and filtering through the lattice screens of the garden walls. You trail your hand across those walls, smooth marble cooled overnight, and think about how many rulers walked here before you. Perhaps Suleiman the Magnificent, pondering laws that would outlive him. Perhaps a concubine peering through the gardens, glimpsing the green life that existed just steps away from the strict order of the harem. These gardens were living storehouses, not decorative fluff. Vegetables from here fed the palace kitchens daily, ensuring the court dined on freshness while markets beyond the walls often dealt in preserved goods. You stop before a small bed of purslane, a plant you might call a weed today. Its round leaves glisten with dew, and you recognize it from summer salads you've heard about in Anatolian villages. The gardeners knew purslane well, not only for its cool crunch but for its supposed medicinal power to lower heat in the body. One of them whispers that in particularly sweltering summers, bowls of purslane salad went to the Sultan himself. Some records suggest it was even considered a modest dish of restraint, proof that sometimes royalty ate the same humble greens as common folk. It's funny to imagine the most powerful man of the empire crunching on weeds, isn't it? You take in the whole scene, cabbages with leaves like elephant ears, leeks standing tall and proud, gourds curling in tangled vines at the garden's edge. You hear the first call to prayer ringing out over the city, the muezzin's voice carried by the morning air. The gardeners pause, straighten their backs, wipe soil from their hands, and murmur their prayers under the gray light. For a moment, the vegetables seem to join in, quiet rows bowing their leafy heads. Walking again, you pass by a stone basin filled with collected rainwater, where reflections ripple as a bird dips in. You think about how many centuries of rain have fed these gardens, how the soil is layered with histories of Byzantines, Ottomans, and all the hands that tilled it. Scholars debate whether these palace gardens were more symbolic, meant to represent paradise, or genuinely practical in providing steady food supplies. The truth is probably both, as the Ottomans loved to fold utility into beauty. The air warms, and you realize the kitchens are already stirring. You smell smoke from the chimneys where wood fires are being lit. Soon, baskets of freshly picked vegetables will be carried inside, roots scrubbed, greens washed, onions peeled. The rhythm of palace life begins not with politics or war councils, but with food. It's the baseline beat of an empire. And here you are, in the middle of it, quietly padding through misty rows, your breath making small clouds, your ears full of distant prayers and pigeon wings. You take one last look back at the gardens. They stretch like a green quilt across the palace grounds, each square patch holding forgotten flavors, waiting for hands to pluck them. The mist begins to lift, and with it, your sense that you've stepped into a liminal place, half dream, half history. You smile to yourself, because you've just begun, and there are still so many strange, humble vegetables waiting to tell their stories. You slip through a low wooden gate, the hinges creaking softly as though reluctant to let you go. On the other side, a different rhythm greets you, the bustle of the open-air market just beyond the palace walls. The sun is higher now, washing color over everything, making the baskets of produce glow like jewels against the dusty ground. You walk slowly, feeling the warmth build on your shoulders, and you realize the market is where forgotten vegetables come alive, not as ornamental garden rows, but as goods in motion, hauled, haggled, sniffed, and purchased. You catch sight of women in layered dresses, their heads wrapped in linen scarves, crouched by baskets of knobby root vegetables. One of them slices open a turnip to show its crisp white inside, and the buyer nods, satisfied with its firmness. The smell of earth mixes with the scent of spices, cumin, cinnamon, dried rose petals sold in folded paper cones. And right there, in the middle of all the scents, your nose catches something sharper, almost radish-like. You turn, and sure enough, a pile of small, bulbous roots sits on a mat, black radishes, their skins rough like charcoal. A merchant waves one at you, grinning with a gap-toothed smile. He explains that these radishes, once peeled, are fiery and pungent, eaten raw in winter to clear the sinuses and keep away colds. Historians still argue whether black radishes were cultivated specifically for medicine or if their role as food was secondary, but clearly they played both parts. You can almost feel your nose sting at the thought, though your sinuses might thank you. A fringe tidbit he throws in, some believed carrying a radish in your pocket warded off evil spirits. You glance at the wrinkled root in his hand and think, well, maybe the evil spirits just don't like bad breath. You wander further down the market lane, where baskets overflow with gourds, small, pear-shaped, with pale yellow skins. These aren't the gourds for scooping water or making bowls, but edible ones, simmered in stews until soft. A boy swats flies lazily away from the basket, clearly more interested in daydreaming than selling. His mother shouts at him, and he snaps awake, offering you one with both hands. It's surprisingly heavy for its size, cool from the morning shade. The boy insists it tastes best stuffed with rice and herbs, baked until tender. You nod, imagining the warm scent of dill and cinnamon drifting through a clay oven. A few steps later, a vendor lays out a strange sight, long, curling stalks of fennel, their fronds spilling like green fireworks. You bend closer, catching a faint anise smell. The man explains that the bulbs are chopped into salads for the wealthy, while the stalks and seeds are dried for teas. Historians still debate whether fennel entered Ottoman kitchens from the Italian influence in Mediterranean trade or came earlier through Persian traditions. Either way, it clearly earned a place here, tucked between sacks of lentils and barley. A donkey brays somewhere down the road, pulling your attention. You turn to see a man unloading sacks of chickpeas from panniers slung over its back. The sacks spill open slightly, the pale peas rolling across the cobblestones like marbles. Children dart to snatch them up, giggling as their mothers scold them for playing with food. Chickpeas aren't exactly forgotten today, but the way they were used in Ottoman kitchens holds surprises. Roasted, ground into flour, even brewed into a kind of coffee substitute when beans were scarce. A quirky tidbit, one merchant insists roasted chickpea coffee cured headaches. You wonder if that was true, or if it just gave people something to sip while pretending they weren't missing the real thing. The sounds of the market swell, bargaining voices, a goat bleating in protest, the metallic clang of scales weighing produce. A woman fans herself with a palm leaf as she argues over the price of onions, their papery skins catching the sun like gold leaf. Next to her, a man hammers open a crate revealing parsnips, pale, sweet roots that resemble carrots but offer a gentler taste. He mutters about how few customers know what to do with them, though in soups they add richness. And it hits you, even back then, some vegetables fought for attention against flashier, more fashionable foods. It seems vegetable popularity contests have always been a thing. Your feet carry you toward the spice end of the market, where cumin dust mingles with dried figs stacked high in pyramids. But tucked between them is something humbler, a pile of dried okra pods, brittle and brown. At first you think it's kindling, but the seller explains these are for winter stews, rehydrated, sliced, thickening broths with their famously slimy texture. You laugh softly, because yes, okra's reputation for slime hasn't changed in centuries. Historians still argue whether Ottomans prized it for that very thickening quality or tolerated it because it was cheap and plentiful. Either way, dried okra bundles dangled from strings were a common market sight. By now, your stomach growls quietly. A woman selling flatbreads tears one and wraps it around fresh herbs and a few slices of pickled turnip, handing it to you with a wink. The bread is warm, the turnip tangy enough to wake your taste buds, the herbs bright with flavor. You chew slowly, savoring the mixture, realizing that forgotten vegetables weren't just eaten, they were transformed, combined, layered into something greater. You glance back at the market stalls, thinking about how much history hides in simple foods that most people would ignore today. The crowd shifts as a cart creaks through, pulled by a sweating ox. Its wooden wheels squeal against the cobbles. On the cart, baskets of sorrel, with their arrow-shaped leaves and sharp lemony bite. Sorrel soups were once a spring staple, refreshing after winter's heavy fare. Some records describe them as cleansing, preparing the body for the warmer months. The fringe tidbit? Sorrel was sometimes mashed into poultices for skin irritations, though you really hope nobody confused the soup bowl with the medicine jar. You pause at the edge of the market, the sun now climbing fully overhead, shadows shrinking beneath the stalls. The noise swirls around you, traders shouting, coins clinking, donkeys stamping. You feel like you've stepped into a timeless space, one where forgotten vegetables still breathe, still shout their flavors across the centuries. You tuck the last bite of turnip sandwich into your mouth and smile. This, you realize, is not just commerce. It's the pulse of a city, the hum of an empire's belly being filled, one strange root and herb at a time. You slip out of the market's commotion and find yourself wandering into quieter alleys where kitchens hum like hidden furnaces. Smoke curls lazily from chimneys, carrying scents both familiar and strange. The air is thick with roasting grains, simmering broths, and the faint bite of vinegar pickles. This is the world of the cooks, palace servants, guild apprentices, street vendors, each stirring pots over glowing embers. You feel the warmth on your cheeks even before stepping through the low arch of a cookhouse. Inside, the rhythm is mesmerizing. Knives thud against wooden boards, ladles scrape the bottoms of copper cauldrons, and someone hums a folk tune over the bubbling chorus. Your eyes drift to a long table where bowls of fresh herbs and vegetables are laid out, ready to be chopped or crushed. Among them sits a mound of small bulbs, their papery skins pinkish and thin. Shallots. They gleam faintly in the light, as though shy cousins of onions. One cook slices them finely, stirring them into yogurt with mint to make a cool relish. Historians still argue whether shallots reached Ottoman tables through Persian influence or local cultivation, but here they're treated as essential, delicate enough for sauces, sharp enough to lift a stew. A fringe tidbit floats from a grinning apprentice: shallots were sometimes believed to sharpen the mind. You imagine harried scribes chewing them before copying manuscripts, trying not to cry too much as their eyes watered. Practical, if not exactly glamorous. The cooks move swiftly, their hands steady, their movements almost theatrical. One squats by a mortar nearly as tall as a child, pounding garlic and salt together with a rhythm that feels like a heartbeat. Another sprinkles coriander seeds into a steaming pot, the smell instantly peppery and citrus bright. You catch sight of dried broad beans soaking in a wooden trough, their pale skins wrinkling as they swell with water. Soon, they'll be mashed into a thick paste, flavored with garlic and lemon, eaten by workers and nobles alike. Broad beans, fava beans, as you might call them, are ancient, humble, and stubbornly nutritious. And still, historians debate whether the Ottomans borrowed bean recipes from Egyptian traditions or developed their own bean stews. Near the fire pit, a young boy carefully fans the embers, his hair sticking to his forehead with sweat. Over the flames hangs a cauldron of lentil soup, brightened with carrots and spiced with cumin. The cook in charge dips a ladle, blows on it, then sips. He nods, satisfied, and sprinkles in a final pinch of salt. The lentils themselves, red, brown, green, were Ottoman staples, cheap but versatile. A quirky tidbit: some Ottoman doctors prescribed lentil broth as a cooling food to balance hot tempers. You smirk, wondering how many arguments were settled with a bowl of soup shoved across the table. As you lean closer to the fire, your eyes catch another dish in progress: stuffed eggplants simmering slowly, their skins darkening, their bellies packed with rice, onions, and herbs. The eggplants glisten with oil, sending up an aroma so rich it feels almost sinful. The cook explains that small, pale eggplants are preferred, more delicate, less bitter. Historians still argue whether eggplants became beloved during Ottoman times or whether they were initially met with suspicion, as some medieval writers considered them unhealthy. Yet looking at the bubbling pot, suspicion seems long forgotten. A soft laugh rings out as another cook lifts the lid on a clay pot, revealing turnip slices simmering with lamb bones. The broth smells sharp, earthy, and faintly sweet. He gestures for you to lean in, explaining that turnips absorb flavors beautifully, transforming tough cuts of meat into something tender and nourishing. A fringe tidbit? Some Ottoman households fermented turnips into a fizzy, sour drink, essentially proto-soda, called salgum. You grin at the thought of medieval soda pop, less cola, more root vegetable zing. The kitchen is alive with chatter. Apprentices joke, complain, and occasionally yelp when the master scolds them for chopping too slowly. A man in the corner stirs bulgur wheat into boiling water, the grains puffing up and releasing a nutty scent. Bulgur was, and still is, a cornerstone, easy to cook, filling, and beloved across the empire. Yet historians debate whether bulgur's spread was tied to military logistics, carried by soldiers on campaign, or to household economies. Either way, here it fills pots, plates, and stomachs without fuss. Suddenly, you notice a plate of what looks like candied vegetables, strips of pumpkin simmered in syrup until translucent. The cook dusts them with crushed walnuts, offering a piece. It's soft, sweet, sticky, and surprisingly delicious. Pumpkin and syrup, you realize, isn't just dessert, it's proof that forgotten vegetables could dazzle when treated with patience. The French tidbit here: pumpkin was sometimes given as a gift between households, a sweet gesture wrapped in sugar. The room thickens with steam. Your hair clings to your forehead, and your throat feels parched. One cook notices and hands you a clay cup filled with cool water steeped in cucumber slices. The water is crisp, refreshing, and cuts through the heat like shade on a summer's day. Cucumber water may sound modern, but here it feels timeless. Historians still argue whether cucumbers originated in India or spread earlier through Persia, but their role in Ottoman kitchens was unquestioned. As you sip, the chatter softens into background hum. The steady motions, the chopping, pounding, stirring, become hypnotic, like a lullaby in culinary form. You realize that these kitchens weren't only about feeding bodies, but also about rhythm, order, and tradition passed from hand to hand. Forgotten vegetables, humble and overlooked, formed the backbone of meals, slipping silently into stews, relishes, and side dishes. You breathe in the mix of garlic, herbs, and wood smoke, and for a moment, you feel suspended between centuries, sharing a meal with ghosts who never stop cooking. You find yourself stepping away from the hot bustle of the kitchens and moving instead toward the palace gardens. The shift is immediate, air cooler, quieter, touched with the faint buzzing of bees instead of the clang of ladles. The gardens unfold like a patchwork quilt stitched by careful hands, rows of herbs, beds of leafy greens, and trellises heavy with vines. Dew still clings to the leaves in the morning light, giving everything a faint shimmer as though someone has dusted the plants with ground glass. You pause by a patch of dark green leaves, wide and leathery. Chard. The gardeners call it potsy, a leafy vegetable prized not for glamour but for resilience. You watch as a gardener kneels, cutting stems near the base, his hands steady and practiced. Chard stalks glow pale against the soil, white and pink ribs running like tiny rivers through the leaves. He explains that the leaves will be chopped into stews or rolled around rice and herbs, the stalks cooked separately to soften their toughness. A mainstream fact here, chard was so common in Ottoman gardens that cookbooks barely bothered to list recipes. It was assumed everyone knew how to prepare it. A fringe tidbit? Some healers believed chard boiled in vinegar could ward off nosebleeds. You wonder how many people walked around with vinegary breath just to stop a drip. Farther along, you pass a plot of leeks, their stalks rising pale and green, roots tucked snug in the damp soil. A young boy pulls one up, shaking off clumps of earth. The smell is strong, oniony yet sweet. You can picture them simmering in a broth, thickening a soup until the flavors melt together. Leeks were staples across the empire, bridging humble village diets and palace feasts. Historians still argue whether leeks held more weight in Ottoman kitchens than onions themselves, since some records suggest they were more prized for their softness and subtlety. The gardener invites you toward a trellis heavy with climbing vines. Hanging from them are gourds, pale green, long and curved, their skins mottled faintly. These bottle gourds, used both as food and as containers, are a curious sight. He points out a few hollowed shells drying in the sun, destined to become flasks or ladles. The quirky tidbit, some Ottoman dervishes carried these gourd flasks as symbols of humility, a reminder to live simply. You grin, imagining a traveling monk sipping water from what looks like a vegetable with a handle. Not far away, you notice rows of lettuce heads, their leaves open like unfurling fans. They look ordinary enough, but the gardener speaks of them fondly. Lettuce, he says, was often eaten at night, lightly dressed, to encourage sleep. You nod knowingly, it's as though the vegetable has been practicing bedtime ASMR for centuries. Historians still argue whether lettuce truly has a sedative effect or whether it was just an excuse to snack before bed. Your feet carry you deeper, where the soil darkens with irrigation. Here grow beets, their leaves lush, their roots peeking like jewels from the ground. The gardener tugs one free, red earth staining his hands. The beet's skin is rough, but when he cuts it, the inside glows like garnet. Beets were boiled, roasted, or even pickled into sharp relishes. A quirky tidbit, beet leaves were sometimes applied as poultices to heal wounds. You picture a soldier patched up not with bandages but with vegetable leaves, and you can't help but smirk at the thought of salad first aid. You sit for a while under the shade of a fig tree at the garden's edge. Nearby, a servant carries baskets woven from reeds, already heavy with cucumbers and radishes. The radishes catch your eye, small, round, and brilliant pink. The servant explains that radishes were common street food, sold fresh with a sprinkle of salt. Simple, crunchy, peppery. Historians still argue whether radishes were dismissed as too plain for high cuisine or celebrated precisely because they were quick, refreshing, and cheap. The fig tree above drops a ripe fruit with a soft thud. You pick it up, its skin purple and yielding, and take a bite. Sweetness floods your mouth, sticky and floral. Figs weren't forgotten so much as they were overshadowed by more exotic imports, but in palace gardens, they thrived in quiet abundance. A fringe tidbit, Ottoman poets sometimes compared figs to lips, soft, sweet, and tempting. You chuckle softly, imagining the vegetable patch moonlighting as a love poem. As the gardeners move through their routines, you notice their tools: simple hoes, curved knives, wicker baskets lined with cloth. There's no rush, no clamor, only steady movement, like breathing made visible. You realize that palace gardens weren't simply about food. They were laboratories for cultivation, sources of medicine, and sanctuaries for weary rulers. The air shifts as a breeze moves through, carrying the mingled scents of mint, dill, and wet soil. You close your eyes, breathing it in, and for a moment the entire empire feels condensed into this garden. The hum of bees, the cool shade of trees, the stubborn growth of leaves that have fed people for generations. Forgotten vegetables, humble leeks, radishes, chard, are here, quiet and persistent, whispering stories into the soil. When you open your eyes again, the baskets are full. Servants lift them easily, heading back toward the kitchens where these greens will be chopped, stewed, and served. You linger a moment longer, feeling as if you've stumbled into a place where time moves at the pace of leaves unfolding, slow, steady, and utterly indifferent to the noise of history. You follow the servants as they carry their wicker baskets from the palace gardens into a shaded courtyard where the air feels cooler, the stone tiles still damp from morning washing. Here, laid out on wide wooden tables, are bundles of plants that look almost like weeds pulled from a roadside ditch. Their leaves are thick, fleshy, and tinged with a faintly sour scent when crushed between the fingers. This is purslane, the quiet little green that earned its place in Ottoman kitchens not through beauty or prestige, but through sheer persistence. You run your hand across the leaves and feel how smooth and waxy they are, unlike the tender lettuce or the velvety spinach. Purslane thrives where other plants falter, pushing up between cobblestones, sprouting in abandoned corners of fields, appearing uninvited yet welcome. Mainstream fact: purslane was so valued for its cooling properties that it appeared regularly in Ottoman summertime recipes, particularly salads mixed with yogurt and garlic. The quirky tidbit? Some people believed purslane could ward off evil spirits if you scattered it around the doorway. You can imagine some weary cook tossing handfuls of greens by the kitchen entrance, muttering about keeping the devils out while keeping supper in. The courtyard bustles with activity. A cook ladles yogurt into a copper bowl, its surface glossy like marble. She stirs in crushed garlic, salt, and sprigs of dill, then tosses in the purslane leaves. The sound is faint but satisfying, the slick leaves sliding against the creamy yogurt. She offers you a taste, and the flavor bursts sharp and lemony, tempered by the cool tang of yogurt. You chew slowly, the texture crisp but succulent, as if the plant had been storing drops of rainwater just for this bite. You picture the dish carried into a shaded dining room on a hot July afternoon, when the air outside presses heavy as a damp blanket. A bowl of purslane with yogurt would be like eating a spoonful of cool river water. Historians still argue whether purslane originated as a cultivated crop in the empire or if it slipped in as a forager's green, elevated by clever cooks into something worth serving at court. Either way, it became the empire's secret summertime ally, keeping feasts bearable when the heat grew oppressive. Nearby, an older gardener recalls that purslane was also considered a healing plant. Physicians recommended it for stomach troubles, for fevers, even for calming a restless mind. A fringe tidbit claims that purslane seeds were once ground into a powder and sprinkled into wine to help the drinker sleep. You smile at the thought of an Ottoman-era nightcap, no whiskey or warm milk, just purslane dust stirred into a goblet of red. Perhaps that's why you feel a little drowsy now, lulled by the garden's shade and the gentle murmur of voices. As you lean against the cool stone wall, a boy passes carrying a bundle of purslane so large it brushes against his shoulder. He hurries toward the market gate, and curiosity nudges you to follow. The bazaar beyond is already humming with life, vendors calling, copper pans clanging, donkeys stamping impatiently. At one stall, bright pyramids of vegetables catch your eye, glossy eggplants, striped melons, and next to them, heaps of purslane bundled with string. A woman stops to buy some, haggling lightly, and you watch her tuck the greens into her basket alongside bread and olives. For her, purslane isn't a forgotten relic. It's dinner tonight, maybe with beans or lentils. The thought steadies you, The vegetable has walked this quiet line through history, unassuming yet unshakable. Back in the palace, the cooks experiment. One mixes purslane into a hot stew with lamb and onions, the sour bite cutting through the meat's richness. Another tosses it with vinegar and cucumbers for a sharp salad. Someone jokes that purslane is so stubborn it could probably grow inside a stew pot if you left the lid open long enough. You laugh softly, imagining a green sprout poking up from a simmering cauldron. The sun begins to rise higher, pressing heat into the courtyard stones. The yogurt purslane bowls are carried away, leaving only faint streaks of green on the wood. You tilt your head back and watch a pigeon swoop low, wings flashing. Perhaps even the birds nibble on purslane seeds between flights. It seems fitting, this plant belongs everywhere, to everyone. As you return to the shaded colonnade, you sense that purslane isn't the kind of vegetable that clamors for attention. It doesn't appear in royal decrees or make a spectacle at banquets. Instead, it whispers its presence, steady and cool, like the shadow under a fig tree. Forgotten by history's loud stories, yes, but still growing, still feeding, still coming. In that quiet persistence, you find something comforting, something that makes the world feel just a little less hurried. The palace kitchens begin to smell richer as the morning stretches into midday, the air thick with onion, cumin, and the sizzle of fat. You wander deeper, toward a corner where cooks are busy rinsing long stalks of something pale and ribbed. At first, you mistake it for celery, until you notice the whiter leaves and the way the stalks curve slightly, almost like the ribs of a fan. This is cardoon, the spiny cousin of the artichoke, and it was once a star of Ottoman winter cooking. You trace a finger along the stalk's ridges, feeling the faint prickle where the thorns have been cut away. Cardoon isn't exactly inviting. Its spines have deterred many casual gardeners, but the Ottomans valued the challenge. Mainstream fact, cardoon was cooked into hearty stews with lamb or chickpeas, offering a delicate artichoke-like flavor once tamed. The quirky tidbit? Some physicians claimed it could act as an aphrodisiac, though you can't help thinking anyone who still felt romantic after chewing through cardoon's fibrous stalk deserved some kind of medal. One cook chops the stalks into thick chunks, dropping them into a copper pot with onions, garlic, and a glug of olive oil. The scent rises, earthy and slightly bitter, mellowing as it simmers. You lean closer, catching that artichoke aroma blooming slowly, like perfume from a sealed jar. Another cook dips pieces of battered cardoon into hot oil, and the crackle is sharp, almost musical. She pulls them out golden and crisp, stacking them on a plate, and you can't resist. The taste is nutty, a little grassy, a reminder that this plant was once a prized delicacy. The kitchen chatter turns playful as someone recalls that cardoon was also fed to geese, whose fattened livers became an indulgence for the wealthy. You wrinkle your nose, imagining the geese waddling around, stuffed with bitter greens. Historians still argue whether Ottoman elites ever served goose liver as extravagantly as their European counterparts, or if the practice remained more modest here. The cooks don't seem to care, they just laugh, nibbling fried cardoon between tasks. Outside the kitchen doors, the market bustles with vendors selling stalks tied into bundles, the leaves still dusted with soil. A boy calls out the price, waving a stalk in the air like a baton. You watch a woman carry hers away, tucked under her arm like a rolled-up carpet. Cardoon isn't dainty, it demands both hands, patience, and a sharp knife. Maybe that's why it faded from modern tables, convenience doesn't suit it. Still, in these kitchens, cardoon earns respect. You sit with a bowl of the stew, the broth rich and comforting, the stalks tender yet still carrying a slight bite. The warmth spreads slowly, like slipping into a heavy cloak. One cook teases that if you eat enough cardoon, your blood will turn green and your tongue sharper than any thorn. You grin sleepily, chewing another piece, wondering whether your tongue feels sharper already. The sun presses harder now, making the courtyard shimmer, but the cardoon dishes seem to anchor the moment in winter, a reminder that these kitchens run on cycles, storing away roots and stalks when leaves wither. Forgotten now by many, cardoon was once the taste of endurance, of patience rewarded, of winter made bearable by a plant that asks much but gives more. You shuffle onward, your belly still heavy with cardoon stew, and drift toward another part of the kitchens where a cook bends over a chopping block, slicing what looked like pale roots with knobby arms and a faint whiff of something spicy. At first glance, you think it's ginger, but the shape is bulkier, the slice is ivory white with faint rings. The cook holds one up proudly, galangal, the peppery cousin of ginger, imported and cultivated through the Ottoman trade web. The air sharpens when the root hits the mortar, ground with garlic and a pinch of salt. You lean closer and your eyes water, the fragrance sharper and cooler than ginger, almost medicinal. Mainstream fact, galangal was once prized in Ottoman kitchens not only as a flavoring for soups and sauces, but also as a digestive aid, making it a common guest at banquet tables laden with heavy meats. The quirky tidbit? Apothecaries also sold candied galangal as a sort of medieval breath freshener, sweet, fiery little cubes that noblemen tucked into their cheeks like lozenges before whispering courtly flattery. A younger cook drops chopped galangal into a bubbling pot of lentils and lamb, stirring slowly with a long wooden spoon. The aroma rises, citrusy and pungent, so different from the cumin and coriander that dominate the room. You can almost hear the contrast, like a trumpet blaring through a string quartet. The stew thickens, the galangal weaving its sting through the richness, giving every mouthful a flash of brightness. Nearby, another bowl holds a sweet syrup, glistening with candied pieces of galangal. You dare a bite. It crunches, releasing fire and sugar in equal measure, leaving your tongue tingling as if you've licked a spark. One cook chuckles, saying galangal wakes the mind faster than a rooster's crow. You agree, though you wouldn't mind something softer right now, since your goal is sleep, not wakefulness. The kitchen gossip turns toward medicine, one cook insisting galangal could cure nausea, another swearing it guarded against the plague. Historians still argue whether galangal was truly used widely as a medicinal cure-all in Ottoman households, or whether its fame came mostly through travelers' exaggerated tales. Either way, you picture merchants hauling crates of these knobbly roots across deserts and seas, little bundles of fire hidden under burlap. The cooks work quickly, slicing and pounding, their hands stained with faint gold from the roots oils. They slip pieces into clay jars for pickling, layering them with vinegar and herbs, ready to be pulled out months later when fresh flavors grow scarce. You imagine opening one of those jars in deep winter, the sharp scent rushing out like a trapped genie, startling you awake. By the time a bowl of the lentil stew reaches you, the galangal has softened, mellowed just enough to hum rather than shout. Each spoonful warms your chest, spreads through your limbs like small embers, until you feel both soothed and a little buzzed. The cooks laugh at your watering eyes, but one pats your shoulder kindly, sliding another piece of candied galangal into your palm. You suck on it slowly, its heat fading into sweetness, and feel yourself drifting into a hazy calm, your tongue still tingling with history. You wander further down the tiled corridor, past stacks of earthen jars and baskets of herbs, until you notice a cluster of cooks leaning over a shallow basin filled with strange, ridged vegetables. They're pale green, like tender cucumbers, but with a bumpy, almost warty surface. One slips through the cook's wet fingers, splashing into the basin with a soft plop. She grins, holding it aloft, bitter melon. The smell is faint but sharp, as if green leaves and aspirin had mingled. Mainstream fact, bitter melon, though now more closely associated with South and East Asian cuisines, traveled into the Ottoman orbit through trade routes, sometimes cultivated in palace gardens for its unusual flavor and supposed medicinal benefits. The quirky tidbit? Some palace physicians recommended bitter melon juice mixed with honey as a cure for melancholy of the heart, basically medieval antidepressants in vegetable form. You can't help thinking a spoonful of this brew might taste like despair sweetened with a single sugar cube. A cook begins to slice the melons into crescents, their pale interior studded with soft white seeds. Each slice reveals a pattern like tiny teeth. He salts them generously, explaining the salt draws out the bitterness. You watch the water bead on their surfaces, glinting under the flickering lamplight. Nearby, another cook stirs pieces into a bubbling broth with onions, garlic, and lamb. The steam rises, pungent, carrying a medicinal bitterness that makes your nostrils flare. Historians still argue whether bitter melon was genuinely embraced in Ottoman kitchens as a staple or whether it lingered more as a novelty, prepared only in medicinal contexts or by chefs eager to impress foreign guests. Yet here, in this kitchen, the cooks handle it like an old friend, grumbling at its taste, joking that it punishes the tongue before blessing the stomach. You dare a bite of sautéed bitter melon, its edges caramelized in olive oil. The flavor is assertive, sharp, and almost metallic, then softened by a squeeze of lemon and a drizzle of pomegranate molasses. It's still bitter, but in a way that makes your mouth curious for the next bite, as if your taste buds are trying to solve a puzzle. A cook laughs at your raised eyebrows, handing you a cup of diluted yogurt drink to chase away the sharpness. One elder cook reminisces about his grandmother, who swore bitter melon tea could lower fevers. Another recalls a scribe who believed eating too much would thin the blood until a man floated away like smoke. You chuckle, trying to picture an Ottoman noble drifting ceiling ward after an overzealous bowl. The basin of bitter melons is soon empty, their slices sizzling in pans or simmering in pots, the kitchen filled with their unique, divisive perfume. You lean against a carved wooden post, the flavor still lingering on your tongue, and realize, sleepy as you are, that history has strange ways of planting surprises in the most humble vegetables. You drift onward through the kitchen's labyrinth, until you pause before a wicker basket brimming with slender, twisted pods the color of faded ivory. At first, you think they might be dried beans, but as you pick one up, you realize it is something different, hyacinth bean, once a quiet resident of Ottoman gardens and forgotten tables. The pod feels firm between your fingers, ridged like the hull of a tiny boat. Mainstream fact, the hyacinth bean, also called lablab, was grown both as an ornamental vine for its purple blossoms and as a food crop, especially when young and tender. Ottoman gardeners admired its climbing nature, training it up trellises near courtyards. The quirky tidbit? Some records mention palace ladies braiding the vine's blossoms into garlands for festivals, as if the vegetable moonlighted as jewelry. A cook cracks open a pod, revealing pale seeds nestled inside, like miniature pearls. He explains that the young beans are boiled or stewed, but the older seeds must be carefully prepared, for raw they can be mildly toxic. You nod, wondering how many hapless apprentices learned that lesson the hard way. Historians still argue whether hyacinth beans were ever a significant staple in Ottoman diets or whether they played more of a decorative, occasional role, pretty to look at, pleasant in small doses, but never as central as lentils or chickpeas. Yet in this moment, you watch as they are tossed into a pan with garlic, onions, and a dash of vinegar, sizzling merrily like any everyday fare. The smell that rises is sharp yet inviting, like green beans crossed with lemon zest. The cook sprinkles saffron into the mix, lending the beans a golden hue as they soften. You spear one with a wooden skewer, blowing to cool it, then chew, tender, slightly grassy, with a hint of nuttiness that lingers on your tongue. Another cook recalls a story of a poet who claimed the hyacinth bean, if eaten in spring, could lift the spirit toward the heavens like a vine climbing skyward. You chuckle at the idea, imagining yourself tethered to a trellis, rising leaf by leaf into the bright Ottoman sun. Nearby, in a jug of fresh water, you see the bean's blossoms, vivid purple petals floating like tiny ships. Someone has dropped them in for decoration, or perhaps to flavor the water faintly. You sip, tasting only the barest floral note, yet it feels refreshing after the bean's hearty bite. The cooks portion the hyacinth beans into wooden bowls, carrying them out toward the banquet hall. You linger a moment longer, watching the vine-patterned shadows flicker against the plaster walls, as if the plant itself has stretched its tendrils even here, into memory. The corridors draw you into a cooler chamber, where the air smells faintly sweet, almost like licorice. On a low shelf you spot a neat row of baskets, each holding pale green bulbs with feathery fronds still attached, spilling like delicate lace. This is fennel, one of the quiet stars of Ottoman kitchens, used in ways both savory and medicinal. You pick up a bulb, its layers overlapping like a tightly clasped fist. Mainstream fact, fennel was cultivated widely across the Mediterranean, prized not only for its crisp bulbs but also for its aromatic seeds. Ottoman cooks shaved the bulbs into stews and roasts, while physicians recommended fennel seed tea to calm stomach aches. A quirky tidbit emerges as a young servant explains that fennel was also chewed as a kind of medieval breath freshener. Imagine the palace courtiers whispering about court intrigues while discreetly crunching fennel seeds, hoping to mask the garlic from lunch. Historians still argue whether fennel was introduced into Ottoman cookery primarily through Arab influence or through older Byzantine traditions, since both cultures revered it. Either way, by the time it reached your plate, fennel was part of a network of flavors stretching from the Aegean to Persia. The cooks slice a bulb into thin crescents and toss it with vinegar, olive oil, and salt. You taste the sliver. It's cool and crisp, with that unmistakable anise-like sweetness that lingers at the back of your tongue. Against rich lamb stews and heavy pilafs, fennel offers a refreshing, almost cleansing contrast. One of the kitchen women sprinkles fennel seeds into a simmering pot of lentils. The seeds dance in the broth like tiny brown boats, releasing a warm fragrance that curls into the air. You lean closer, eyes half closed, breathing in the licorice-laced steam until you nearly forget where you are. The memory of fennel threads itself into songs, too. A musician tuning his oud in the courtyard hums a line about fennel-sweet air by the Bosphorus shore, an old folk lyric passed down from fisherfolk who grilled their catch with fennel stalks thrown on the fire. The thought makes your mouth water, a grilled mackerel, smoke rising, fennel sweetness weaving through the salt air. As the cooks finish, a bowl of fennel salad is carried out, its pale crescents glistening with oil, scattered with sprigs of parsley. You watch it disappear into the hall, knowing it will be eaten quickly, overlooked perhaps, yet remembered in the quiet freshness it brings after so many rich, heavy flavors. You run your fingers along the fronds one last time, their threads soft as feathers, and imagine them brushing against your cheek like a whisper from the past. You drift onward through the vaulted pantry, where shafts of dusty light fall across bundles of herbs tied with twine. Among them, a curious cluster catches your eye, long stems with broad, pale green leaves, bundled like a bouquet but less fragrant than mint or basil. This is purslane, a humble weed in some places, yet in the Ottoman kitchen it was gathered carefully and cooked with pride. Mainstream fact: purslane is one of the oldest cultivated plants, valued for its high levels of omega-3 fatty acids long before anyone knew what omega-3s were. Ottoman cooks simmered it with lentils or stewed it with lamb, turning what looks like a field wheat into something nourishing and satisfying. Quirky tidbit: some records mention purslane being used as a kind of mild pickle, soaked in brine and vinegar to brighten heavy winter meals. Picture palace servants chewing on tangy purslane stalks like crunchy snacks while waiting for orders to deliver trays. Historians still argue whether purslane was deliberately cultivated in Ottoman gardens or simply harvested wild along riverbanks and field edges. To you, strolling through this imagined kitchen, the debate feels less important than the sight of a cook chopping its leaves into a clay pot, their jade green sheen darkening as the heat takes them. A ladle dips into a pot of yogurt soup, and their purslane floats, tender, softened, but still a little bright. You taste a spoonful. It's cooling, tart, and earthy, the kind of flavor that seems made for hot Anatolian summers. The cook laughs softly, explaining that children were often sent to gather purslane, since it sprouted everywhere after rain. It grew so abundantly that some poets used it as a metaphor for persistence, soft, low-growing, but impossible to eradicate. Later, when a dish of purslane stew is carried to the dining hall, you notice it doesn't sparkle like saffron pilafs or gleam like trays of candied almonds. Instead, it sits quietly, a muted green on glazed ceramic, waiting for someone who appreciates the gentle, grounding flavor it offers. And as you taste it again, you realize that sometimes the forgotten vegetables of history are also the ones that quietly fed empires. You move deeper into the kitchen storerooms, where jars and baskets spill over with curious roots. One pile looks almost like carrots but paler, longer, and more knobbly. A cook lifts one up proudly and calls it skirt, a root so sweet that some compared it to honey trapped in the soil. Mainstream fact: skirt was grown widely in Europe and Asia during the Middle Ages, and Ottoman cooks prized it for soups and stews, especially when blended with spices like cinnamon and clove. Unlike potatoes, which arrived later from the New World, skirt carried a history rooted firmly in the Old World's gardens. Quirky tidbit: the roots grew in clusters, a little like tangled fingers, and cooks often complained about how much effort it took to peel them. Some simply boiled them whole, skins and all, hoping the diners wouldn't notice. You can almost hear one palace cook muttering under his breath as he scrapes yet another root, rolling his eyes at the endless task. Historians still argue whether skirt was a staple food in Ottoman markets or more of a niche delicacy reserved for noble tables. What is clear is that it was valued enough to travel in caravans, tucked beside more glamorous cargo like saffron or dried apricots. You bite into a slice, boiled until tender, then drizzled with a little honey. The taste is surprisingly delicate, almost like a parsnip but softer, with a lingering sweetness. It's the kind of flavor that feels like comfort food, though you know modern tongues would probably overlook it in favor of fries or rice. A scribe nearby makes a note about skirt's supposed medicinal powers, claiming it lightens the stomach and brings cheer to the heart. Whether that's true or not, you find yourself smiling, lulled by the simple charm of a root that once played its quiet part in sustaining an empire. As the cook sets the dish on a polished tray, you realize that the Ottomans, like so many before them, found dignity not just in gold or grandeur, but in humble roots that could fill a belly and warm a weary traveler at day's end. The next pantry alcove smells faintly sweet, almost like roasted chestnuts mixed with damp earth. You notice a woven basket brimming with something unusual, bulbous, pale roots that look like knotted turnips but with a smoother skin. A cook gestures toward them with a grin, calling them chufa or tiger nuts, though they're not nuts at all. Mainstream fact, chufa was cultivated around the Mediterranean for centuries, and the Ottomans enjoyed it as both a snack and an ingredient. The roots could be eaten raw, roasted, or ground into a paste, and in Spain, where Ottoman influence lingered, they famously became the base of horchata, a cooling drink still loved today. Quirky tidbit, some palace records suggest chufa was given to children as a treat, sweet enough to satisfy cravings, yet hearty enough to fill a stomach. Imagine a medieval Ottoman kid gleefully pocketing tiger nuts the way modern kids might stash candy. The crunch, the earthy sweetness, it was both food and entertainment. Historians still argue whether chufa was widely consumed in Ottoman cities or limited to certain regions where it grew more easily, like the fertile plains along river deltas. What's certain is that when traders carried sacks of it to markets, it never stayed unsold for long. You pick one from the basket, rub off a bit of soil, and bite down. The flavor surprises you, nutty, milky, with a texture halfway between almond and chestnut. A cook explains how they grind these little tubers into flour, mixing it with honey to form chewy sweets served at festivals. He holds up a tray of golden brown cakes, their surfaces glistening faintly under a film of syrup. Later, you sip from a clay cup filled with a milky white drink made from chufa soaked and pressed. It tastes refreshing, cool even in the heavy kitchen air, as if you've stumbled on a medieval milkshake. The cook chuckles, saying that even warriors returning from long campaigns would crave this gentle drink. As you set the cup down, you feel a sense of quiet gratitude for the small, humble tuber that found its way into palaces and common homes alike. It was never flashy, never commanding like saffron or silks, yet it fed people, soothed thirst, and, perhaps most importantly, left behind a sweetness that lingers on your tongue even as you walk deeper into the kitchen's history. The kitchen air grows thicker as you step into a corner lined with barrels, baskets, and the faint perfume of dried leaves. Among them sits a crate of nabla stalks with frayed ends, celeriac, a cousin of celery that looks more like a lumpy stone than something you'd want to eat. The cooks chuckle when they see you hesitate. One nudges the root, saying, ugly, but noble, as if that explains everything. Mainstream fact, celeriac, sometimes called celery root, was valued in the Ottoman kitchen for stews and broths, especially in winter when green vegetables grew scarce. It brought a sharp, earthy aroma that cut through fatty meats, and palace cooks considered it essential for balancing richer dishes. Quirky tidbit, one record claims the Sultan requested celeriac soup whenever he had headaches, believing its crisp, herbal tang could cool the fire of thought. Imagine sitting in silk cushions, sipping broth made from something that looks like a troll's knuckle. It's oddly endearing. Historians still argue whether celeriac was a luxury item imported from Europe or already naturalized in Anatolia during early Ottoman times. Some evidence points to monastic gardens cultivating it for medicinal use, while others suggest palace demand spurred its wider farming. You pick one up. Its coarse skin scratches your palm, but the scent rising from a cut edge is clean and green, like walking past crushed herbs in a garden after rain. A cook dices the bulb into neat cubes, tossing them into a simmering pot with lentils and lamb. Slowly, the sharpness mellows, blending into a broth that smells comforting enough to silence conversation. Later, you're handed a wooden bowl. The soup glows golden, with pale pieces of celeriac floating like little moons. The taste is strange at first, peppery, herbal, slightly sweet, but it grows on you, until you realize this humble root has quietly shaped the entire flavor of the dish. As you finish, you think about how forgotten vegetables often work like background musicians, never taking the stage, but without them, the melody collapses. Celeriac, with its noble disguise, belongs firmly in that category. The last storeroom feels quieter, as though it holds something not quite ordinary. Along the shelves, wrapped in straw and stacked in clay jars, lie bundles of roots that resemble tiny, pale carrots. These are skirrets, sweet roots that once had their moment of glory and then slipped almost entirely from memory. You lift one, it's slender, creamy white, and faintly fragrant, with the kind of delicacy that seems at odds with the bustle of the Ottoman palace kitchen. Mainstream fact: skirrets were cultivated in both Europe and parts of the Middle East during the medieval period, praised for their sweet flavor that intensified when boiled or roasted. In Ottoman kitchens, they were sometimes candied in honey or folded into rice dishes for a hint of earthy sugariness. Quirky tidbit: one traveler wrote that eating too many skirrets could make your hands tingle with cheer. Whether that was poetic exaggeration or an early nod to their high carbohydrate content, the image is amusing. You picture janissaries giggling as though they'd overdosed on root vegetables. Historians still argue whether skirrets were truly widespread in the empire or only a passing fad brought in through trade with northern Europe. Some suggest they briefly caught on in courtly circles before vanishing beneath the rise of more practical staples like potatoes centuries later. A cook hands you a small dish, skirrets simmered with saffron and almonds. The flavor is gentle, like a whisper of sweetness that lingers at the edges of rice and meat. You chew slowly, realizing this forgotten root is a reminder of culinary experiments long since abandoned, yet once deeply cherished. The meal finished, you leave the kitchens behind, and with it the long parade of neglected vegetables that shaped Ottoman tables in ways both obvious and invisible. You carry the scents with you: tangy sorrel, earthy celeriac, honeyed skirrets, each one a ghost of forgotten gardens. The palace fades, and you find yourself walking in twilight fields. The soil is cool, the plants bowing in a hush that feels eternal. Every forgotten vegetable lies waiting, not lost but merely sleeping, ready to be rediscovered when the world slows down enough to notice them again. Your steps grow slower, your breath calmer, and the scents of herbs and roots dissolve into a soft blur, like memories slipping back into the earth. You sink into that silence. The voices of cooks, merchants, and travelers fade away, leaving only the steady rhythm of your own heartbeat, gentle as the murmur of water over stones. The vegetables no longer demand your attention, they simply rest, like you do now, in the quiet cycle of time. So you let your eyes drift closed. The kitchens grow dark, the corridors lengthen into dreams, and you feel the calm of history holding you in its arms. The forgotten flavors blur into warmth, the air hums with peace, and you are safe, still, and finally ready to sleep.